Right, welcome back to News Diary. We want us to have a conversation on the 16 days of activism that starts tomorrow. That is the 25th all through to 10th December. And in studio, I'm joined by Florence Mashir. She is the Data and Research Lead, Office of Gender, Office of the President, Women's Rights Advisor. And also there's Dr. Leila Hussein. She's a psychotherapist. Thank you so much both for making time.
Thank you.
Right, so tomorrow, of course, the 16 days of activism is starting. What are your expectations before we get into details this year?
My expectation is based on the theme of the year, which is investing to end gender-based violence. And so my expectations, even within the current budget, which has seen some more allocation on focusing on ending gender-based violence. My expectations are also for us as a country, the commitments we've made through the Generation Equality Forum, making sure that those commitments are done by 2026, which is when we committed ourselves to pushing to end all forms of gender-based violence.
Right, we'll get into details about that. But Dr. Leila, what about you? What's your expectation?
Well, just following from what Florence said in terms of the theme, which is investing in girls. And for me, especially if we're speaking about girls in this continent, we really need to invest in mental health and well-being, because currently Africa is having a crisis, a pandemic around mental health. We have one of the highest number of suicides at the moment. But unfortunately, girls are always left behind in these spaces. So for me, my expectation is to see a political commitment on the well-being or mental health of girls, hopefully by investing in safe houses, ensuring girls can access mental health services. So for me, I'm speaking as a therapist, I'm also speaking as someone who goes to therapy once a week, but it's still considered a very luxury access. But it's a basic human right for us. And our mental well-being has an impact on our overall well-being. And imagine if girls had great well-being mentally, emotionally, and socially, we'll be having a better society. So that's really critical. Right. So this is a long-term goals that we're always aiming for.
Right, for sure. I want us to get a bit personal. Florence, maybe for you, what is it your passion when it comes to like women's rights agenda, or just making sure that the women's right is forward?
In fact, when I joined the Office of the Women's Rights Advisor, I was very happy when the President nominated, or rather put in this office. It's the first of its kind, the Women's Rights Advisor's Office, which helps us look at the gaps. Now, I've been in the civil society before, and we've pushed a lot of laws, the Sexual Offences Act, Anti-FGM Act. We've seen a lot of laws. And the gaps we've always seen from that other side is the implementation of it. And being where I am and sitting in the Office of the Women's Rights Advisor, it gives me a vantage point, because then I'm able to see this is where the gaps are. But then, of course, taking lead in terms of data is finding out what is data telling us in terms of gaps in policies and what can we do, which then will inform where do we put the money to ensure that then we mitigate and we reduce, because we have beautiful laws, we have beautiful policies, but where are the gaps? And so sitting in this office allows me and the rest of the team and Honorable Harriet to start looking at where are the gaps, to advise the President appropriately, and also check the intersection within ministries. Who is not doing what, and how can we support to ensure that work is done? Is it the police? Is it the healthcare system? Is it mental health, investing in mental health? And I think when you were talking about mental health, what came to my mind is the fact that now we have the social health insurance. And for me, if every woman can get social insurance, especially around mental health, we'll be getting somewhere. And even when you look at it this way, when a perpetrator is taken to court, and then there's justice in terms of he's taken in, evidence points at him or the person, and then they go in, what happens to the survivor? What after I leave the courtroom? So what? He's in jail. What about me? And so that's when the mental health issues come in, and we would like to start seeing the judiciary saying, okay, we want, Florence, after this has happened, Florence, the Ministry of Health, to ensure that you get psychosocial support for the time that you need it. Because it's not like a NAM, you know, psychosocial support, I could take 3 months, you could take 6 months. And so investing in that as well. So this office is at the vantage point of looking at gaps, identifying those gaps, coming up with solutions, and pushing it to the line ministries to implement. Yes, so my background and sitting where I'm sitting is very exciting at this moment in this country, to be sitting here and flagging, because I know exactly where the gaps are.
And how you see how everything is intertwined.
Exactly,
yeah. Dr. Leila, coming to you, I know one of the things you work hard is, you know, eradicating FGM. Could you just tell us a bit more about your passion into women's rights?
Yeah, I mean, it's a personal, I mean, all three of us are women. We were once girls.
Right.
So unfortunately, I have to be in this space. So for me, my passion just started because I'm a girl. And I saw very early on, undergoing female genital mutilation myself, that the world already sent me a message that I'm different. So I knew I was being discriminated. So my work is not necessarily around just FGM. When we're talking about FGM, we are talking about child abuse and child protection, and we have to see it in that context. So I guess my work has been really the work I've been doing with the girl generation, and now I sit on the Women for Women International board, and really my message and my work has been, we need to reframe the power of language, because when we talk about African children, we always say, oh, it's tradition, it's culture. No one would put that on a white girl. So it's really up to us now. We need to, as Africans, and I'm so happy that you are, you know, Florence, it's here to have someone who really advocates for this by saying, no, if our girls are violated, we need to say they're violated. And as a therapist, my role is to help my client name what they've experienced. I cannot sit there as a therapist and be okay that what my client is describing is clearly assault. I will not be calling it cultural tradition. And this is really the work I'm trying to encourage. Organizations, politicians, you know, all of us, even in the media, is really critical, because language has extreme power, and we need to ensure we give African girls the justice by naming their experiences. By not naming it, we are not acknowledging or honoring what they've experienced. That's
very true. I mean, especially a lot of the times it's referred to either culture or tradition.
It's not. Right. I think if you just add, when we say child marriage, to me personally, I'm like, it's not child marriage, it's defilement. Right. This is a child who is being raped every day in the name that they're in a marriage. So for me, sometimes I feel like the word child marriage sanitizes the fact that this is a child who's being defiled every single day of her life. And so we say child marriage, and it sounds very nice, and we don't feel like it's too bad because it's child marriage. So the language.
It's a little bit it's because marriage is between two people who consented. A child cannot consent. Again, as Africans, we really need to we need to be encouraged to step away from that language and call it for what it is.
Call it for what it is. Wow, I like that. I'm coming back to you, Florence, now, because you're in data. Is there any statistics that you could give us, especially here in Kenya, of gender-based violence?
Actually, when we were seated in the waiting room, we were looking at, you were sharing the statistics around, they just concluded KCPE and the results that were there. And you could see, and I don't know whether the producer can pull that out, but we were just looking at the statistics from certain counties showing the number of boys. And I promise you, with those counties, child marriage is high, FGM is high, completely. So you can see that. So for me, even just if you know, the audience can look at yesterday's results and the statistics that are coming out, and compare to those counties, what is unique in those counties, and you'll find all the traditional harmful practices are in those specific counties.
The specific 10 counties, actually.
Yes. Early this year, when the DHS came out, the Demographic and Health Survey, we were so sad in the office. We were like, what are we not doing right? When we saw statistics that were showing women saying it is okay to be beaten. And I'm going into the salient, the narrative inquiry around the data as opposed to the number, because I've realized sometimes when we say this percentage, it sounds so soft and nice. It's just 20%, and you can't really equate it. So when we use narrative inquiry to look at what are the numbers behind, what is the story behind these numbers, then it really shocks us. We went to Busia, Honorable Harriet and I, we traveled to Busia, and we traveled to different counties. We've been doing county visits just to get the pulse of the women and link with the policy. And so we went to Busia, and today, by the way, the Ministry of Gender is launching 16 days of activism in Busia. So it is happening today. So we went in Busia, and in a room we had 25 children below 12, between 3 and 12, who'd been defiled.
Oh my God.
In one room. So you can imagine the state in which we left that space. The reason I'm saying that in terms of statistics, I want to talk about the gaps in the statistics that we don't see. So the statistics that we take through the Kenya Demographic and Health Survey and the National Bureau of Statistics always look at age 15 to 49. Now, age 15 to 49 is the statistics we get. We don't get statistics from 15 and below. And we don't get statistics from 50 and above. So when we went to Busia, we even had another room, about 10 grandmothers between the age of 65 and 85 who had been raped. So those numbers we don't have. So every time we talk about gender-based violence and we're talking statistics, sometimes I feel like the statistics I'm going to give you are not really representative, yes.
Right.
So the anecdotal evidence that we are seeing on the ground is that 3-year-olds are being violated, 2-year-olds are being violated, 12-year-olds. And this age group, kangaroo courts are happening in the village level. And those are the gaps we are seeing and highlighting. Gaps within the data, but also gaps within response. Because remember, when there is no data, there is no financing. When there is no financing, there is no action. So we are pushing within the Office of the Women's Rights Advisor to have the data of those numbers that we don't see, so that we are able to do the proper interventions and focus more on prevention, because that data then helps us to see where do we put the stopgap. Yes.
Dr. Leila, I want to come to you now and talk about, let me call it alternative resolutions. So for instance, when we're talking about culture, you find if a child or if a child is defiled, the 3-year-old that you're talking about, instead of going to the courts, there's the option of talking to the elders, for instance. In your experience, for instance, what do you think should be done in such a case where the culture sort of overtakes the actual thing that needs to be done, for instance, even in the courts?
I mean, for me,
it's a criminal case.
Yes, but it is. I understand.
Thank you.
Yes, but
I'm going to piggyback on what she's saying. But what needs to happen? No, it is happening. But what we need to go back and do? We need to be teaching children, school teachers, about abuse first. We need to teach children at a very young age how to report abuse. Because when you, as a survivor, now claim this as abuse, no one can tell you. I mean, you have to go through the court system. So we need to actually start changing how our school teachers operate. So education is really critical, and this is really the government plays a massive role. Because, right now, because we have these systems in place, we have to revolutionize on the inside. So we have to educate our health professionals that they need to report this. I've heard many times where girls have died. Imagine a 7-year-old died of undergoing FGM because an adult sat on their chest, lungs have, collapsed. But then I've been told, the hospital notes, they will put down it was an accidental or it was God's will. But we really need to begin training our medical profession, school teachers, and I think that's when we're going to see changes. I personally don't believe if a child's harmed, it goes to another adult who's holding that system. And again, this is why we need to reframe this language. No one, I grew up in Britain, that conversation would never even be allowed because a child's been harmed, and by going through the justice system, it's society saying we value this child. So as Africans, we need to value our girls. I love our culture. I love our food. I love our music. I love how we dress. We have a beautiful culture, but we should not claim violating of children as our culture. And that's really, as an African, I think that's very offensive to us, that we have to constantly claim these horrible acts against our children. And I refuse we claim that as our culture.
Right. Florence, let's talk about now like governance and like policies. What steps then can governments take to strengthen policies and laws when it comes to women's rights?
So many things are happening that are interlinked. So I mentioned the Social Security Fund.
Yes.
That's part of it, making sure that we have access to healthcare. But also from where we sit and the commitments that the government has made, the Gender Equality Forum commitments, which include having safe houses, government-run safe houses, meaning that then we won't have a problem with funding, because the current safe houses mostly are run by NGOs. And when a donor decides, I don't feel like funding this
and it needs to be
area
monitored properly.
Exactly.
Right, yes.
And so having services closer to the people, reducing re-traumatization of survivors, and we have seen a lot of things happening. The judiciary has launched the SGBV strategy, the child protection strategy around the Children's Act, which makes sure that then within the justice system, we reduce re-traumatization of survivors. The next, of course, engagement is around making sure that the police are not re-traumatizing survivors, that then we have a properly trained police unit that focuses on violations, so that we do proper investigations to sustain court cases, but then also we make sure that there's the well-being of the survivor. There is no re-traumatizing. You are not being asked very demeaning questions when you go to report. And so that is why these commitments that government made, including having a safe house, then helps us, creates for us an opportunity, which we are working on, to ensure that then we have all services, health, forensics, psychosocial support, the judiciary, there are now SGBV courts, and having a place where if I am running, it's a case of intimate partner violence and I need to go to the police, they need to know where to take me, as opposed to putting me in a cell. Because when they lack elsewhere to put you, they'll put you in the female cell. And you're not a criminal, you have been violated. And so those structures that we need to put in place to help our laws make sense and to help our policies make sense is what now we are working on. Yes.
Right. Dr. Leila, now from an international perspective, since you sit on the Women for Women International, what needs to be, or like what more needs to be done? I know that policy is already in place, but what more needs to be done?
I mean, one thing we need, and Florence said this earlier, Kenya actually has one of the best laws around protecting women and children. We just don't implement them.
Right.
So the best thing we really need to do, and it has to come from a political level to a grassroots. It has to be done all at once. Again, we need to relook at our education system. Imagine if we taught our children well-being, how to look after their finances very early on, and today we're in technology, teaching about computers. Imagine the kind of generation we're going to be having if we do that. When I say well-being, I mean they'll be taught about healthy relationships, how to protect their body, how to report if violence happens. We need to normalize those conversations. So, but we can't, those of us especially who are working at grassroots level, working with NGOs, working with the government, we need to come together because it has to, we have to be aligned. I think until that happens, and the media plays a massive role because you have access to people that we don't have access to. So when you're reporting on these kind of issues, please use the right language. It's very critical because you might be speaking to a survivor who needed to hear that, and she might come forward when you acknowledge her experience.
Right. Florence, as we wrap up now, I want you to tell us maybe what role do you think men and boys can play during this 16 days of activism?
I think men need to really, and I'm not going to say the cliche, remember, this is your mother, this is your sister,
You don't need to be
your wife.
It's so offensive to men, by the way, when you say that.
When you protect a woman, it's part of her human right. Human rights are women's rights. The only reason we say women's rights is so that you can focus on the salient issues that affect women. But basically, human rights are women's rights. And so if we can uphold human rights as men, as boys, then we are getting somewhere. And then maybe for the boys, I think the men have abdicated their responsibility in raising a man who appreciates a woman and the rights that she have within society. A society keeps on changing, even at acknowledging care work. And the fact that when you're here in studio, I don't know whether you're married, but when you're here in studio, somebody's taking care of your child, for example, and it is part, and when the child is sick, you have to really stop work and stuff, but men hardly do that. So supporting your women, supporting the woman around you, the kind of language that we use, that sometimes is very demeaning. I saw yesterday an article about, and I'm not advertising for Super Metro, but women lining up to get into a matatu that they feel is safe. That many matatus will come, they will not board, but they will board Super Metro. Why? Because they feel safe. Why? Because in these other matatus, the language that is used is very demeaning. And as a woman, that's the last thing I want to hear. So even if we could change our language, if we could support the advocacy measures around protecting our children, if we could be the ones refusing to take dowry when a child is being married off, if we could be the ones who are championing when there's a violation, instead of just saying, what about the boy child? When there's a violation, just say there's a violation and speak up. I think we will go a long way, because culture or traditions are created by patriarchy, but then I know that some of the custodians of patriarchy are women, and so the stopgap starts from that. And the women will do it because the tradition, which was created by man, we are trying to make sure that our tradition does not die.
Thanks, Florence. We're really running out of time, but I want Dr. Leila to just give us her final parting shot before I let you go.
I think my final words are, for one, make sure you use the right language, follow an organization in your area, and use your skills to amplify this message. But my really important message is really towards the media. You really have a responsibility to tell these stories exactly how they need to be told. And if you need help, we can always step in.
Fantastic. This has been really very interesting and very enlightening. Thank you very much. Of course, that is Dr. Leila Hussein. She is a psychotherapist, joined together with Florence Mashir. She is a women's rights advisor. Thank you both for your time. I want us to take a short commercial break here on News Diary, but in just a bit we'll be back with News Center, so don't go too far.